Howdy, howdy. Sue Devil here, and welcome to episode 6 of our Essential Units versus the Lizardmen series. And in this episode, I really want to take a look at the Dwarf ranged units versus the Lizardmen cavalry. And a couple other little things. I wanted to really see how well they stand up against the charge, against the feral cold ones. They're a very cheap unit for the Lizardmen, and they're very good actually for what they do. They're kind of like wolf riders or something. They can do a lot of damage, and they're pretty annoying. But I wanted to see how our ranged units stood up against the charge, and so I put them up against the feral cold ones and then the cold one riders in a bit. Not every unit, because it was obvious that most of them are going to get demolished. But I didn't shoot with them. I just wanted to see what they are, how they do against the charge, and how they do in that just hand-to-hand fight, to see how they fend for themselves in that back line. And I also took a look at a few other things, but we'll go through the spreadsheet again. For those that don't like heavy spreadsheet work or analysis, I will do a bit of a summary at the end. Definitely did find a couple interesting, really one thing that was fantastic, and a couple places to put your chevrons. And we will go to the spreadsheet and start working our way through it to look at the testing. Alrighty, so like I said, I set the test up with the Rangers against the feral cold ones. I didn't fire with them. I took their fire at will off and put them in hand-to-hand mode to see how they would stand up against the charge, and to see what kind of value they would get or not get out of that. And our Rangers, of course, they don't have a lot of armor. The feral cold ones are armor piercing. And of course I took the time the battle started, the time the battle ended, and how long it took, and what each unit finished with for hit points, and of course looked at the damage per second, the DPS of each, and the gold differential after the encounter, and how much gold per minute we were winning or losing. And the Rangers just pretty much got crushed. They lost every battle, and they lost a lot of gold in that encounter. So we know Rangers, just plain Rangers in the back line, will get absolutely demolished by the Lizardmen Cav. So we'll keep going down and looking at the units that are here. So I wanted to look at the Quarrelers. Quarrelers have armor. They're a little more robust. So I wanted to see how they'd fare in that hand-to-hand engagement against the feral cold ones. And they did slightly better. You know, they still lose 155 gold, but they were only losing 67 gold per minute, and they won 2 of them. I mean, just barely. The feral cold ones don't have a lot of hit points. Now, of course, if you're playing against another player, they will cycle charge you. This was just one charge and then fight, so it's not really indicative of exactly how it's going to play out, but they may charge and just leave their units in, saying, you know, because Quarrelers are a pretty juicy target, ranged in general, and most players will feel that they can just send them in and win that straight up without cycle charging. The next unit I looked at is I wanted to see the Quarrelers with great weapons. Now, this is not a unit that I would really bring in any case. They're not going to counter skirmish as well, but we'll take a look at that. But I wanted to see how they were going to do against the feral cold ones. And they did not too bad. They won every time. But interestingly, even though they won, they still lost gold in that encounter. We're an average of 43 gold at 30 gold per minute. Their DPS was way up, doing 30 damage per second versus 13 and 16, but they were taking a lot more shots. The feral cold ones, I mean, all they would have to do is cycle charge your Quarrelers with great weapons twice, and they'd probably win that. But interesting. The next unit we looked at was the Thunderers. Just curious, that is a potentially good pick for shooting down the big dinosaurs and being in your back line. How do they stand up against the feral cold ones? Well, not very good. They lose 185 gold, and that's at 135 gold per minute. Even though they win, they're winning 80% of the time. It's very close. in any case, like, they can kind of stand up, but there's not going to be a lot of units left. They only finished with an average of 1,100 hit points from 4,200, so there's not going to be much left of them to fight on after that. And the battle took about 90 seconds. The next unit we tested was the Rangers with great weapons. It's a unit we're really looking at for something to go up against the big dinosaur units, because they have they do a really heavy damage with their axes. How did they do against the charge? Well, they won everyone, but again, they lost gold in that encounter, minus 120, and they lost 100 gold per minute. They do pretty decent DPS. They do have armor piercing on their weapons as well as their ranged, but the feral cold ones really gave it to them, did 41 damage per second, and even though they lost the encounter, they win the battle of the gold count, and that's what really we're looking for. We're looking at which units are going to pull gold out of that, because that's really how I like to evaluate units versus each other. So I looked at the Ulthar's Raiders, and I didn't use their Marked by Ulthar. I just wanted to see straight up how do they do in the melee engagement. And again, well, they win 80% of the time. They lost one of those, but they lose a lot more gold than just the regular Rangers with the great weapons. So Ulthar's Raiders really can't stand up to a charge. They do have pretty good weapon damage, and they do armor piercing, but on the charge, they're going to get really demolished, even by feral cold ones. The next unit was the Bugman's Rangers, and these are the ones I really wanted to look at. They got buffed big time in the Tomb Kings patch. They now have charge defense against large. They generally have generally just a lot better. And so how did they do up against the feral cold ones? Again, they're not firing when they come in. It's just a straight up hand-to-hand combat. I did let them accept the charge. I didn't charge them in because they have charge defense against large. And, well, they won everyone really handily. They won all 5. They ended up with 3,500 hit points from 4,900. So they're going to have a lot of capability left after that engagement. And you know, if they get 1 or 2 shots in before those feral cold ones hit them, they're going to crush them. And of that 3,500 hit points, when it's over, they're going to start healing because they have regeneration. Bugman's Rangers are, I'll tell you right now, they're ridiculous. They are incredibly good, and they are, well, I really think what was needed for the Dwarfs to defend the edges, but I thought I wanted to look for a sweet spot for the chevrons with the Bugman's Rangers because they did so well. So I thought there's really 3 sweet spots in the chevrons. 1, 3, and I think 7 or 8. No, 6 or 7. I can't remember where the other one is. But when you chevron up a ranger or a ranged unit in general, you get melee defense, melee attack, leadership, of course, which does matter, a little bit of vigor, and you also get weapon damage on their ranged weapon, which is important. And when we look at the counter skirmishes, we will see the difference. But I put 3 chevrons on them. I wanted to see if I could pull more value out of that engagement, and brought them up from 750 to 846. Unfortunately, they don't. At 3 chevrons, their gold differential drops down from 103 to 81, and they're only pulling 75 gold per minute. I think 1 chevron is the correct number for them. I didn't do the test again at 1 chevron, but I'm quite sure that they would pull more than 103, and again, they would increase their gold per minute. I mean, you can see their DPS goes up, and the feral one's DPS goes down, and it's kind of what you'd expect. But this is a potential of 3 chevrons, and we'll see in a later test kind of what that does, because it can be quite good. So we'll go look at the Trollhammer torpedoes. I'm curious about how these guys would stand up to the charge, because they are incredibly strong against large targets, and boy, oh boy, do they get smashed. The Feral Cold Ones, a unit that's 450, demolishes them in 107 seconds. They lose 700 gold, 450 gold per minute. They lose every single one of those. I mean, they don't have a lot of health, and of course they're not meant for the melee engagement, but if you've ever used Trollhammer torpedoes, you know the opposing player is going to target them and try and get a unit on them as to stop them from shooting. And I've seen a lot of online battles where people bring Trollhammer torpedoes, and they really do get focused. They get focused by magic, they get focused by skirmishers, artillery if there is some, and of course cavalry. And these feral cold ones can just crush them. So one of the things that I was looking at, because I'm going to look at Trollhammer torpedoes more in depth in the next episode, because we're going to look at the anti-large range for dwarfs in this encounter to see what you should have in the pocket to fight against their large units. And Trollhammer torpedoes are really strong for two reasons. One, they do a ton of damage and they're anti-large, but they also put the debuff to leadership of -10 for being hit by artillery, and you add that to even a ranger or anything else hitting that unit, and that'll give them a debuff of -5 on their leadership for being hit by arrows, and that'll add up to -15. So you can really use these Trollhammers along with another ranged unit to rout those big dinosaurs extremely quickly. But man, oh man, they get obliterated. And they get obliterated by anything that's going to get them in hand-to-hand. But this is really dangerous. So what this would say to me is that if I'm going to have Trollhammer torpedoes in my army, I need to have a unit dedicated to protecting them full time, and that's it. It's just so they can get their shots off. And what I mean by that is maybe you have a unit of miners or a unit of dwarf warriors with great weapons. We looked at that. There's a sweet spot for those guys at 622 gold. I think it's 6 chevrons or 5 chevrons or whatever. You need a unit that is on Trollhammer protection duty just to get in the way of a charge, muck up a big dinosaur that's running around, do whatever it can just to protect your Trollhammers. And I don't know if I'll be able to look at that or test it extremely well, but that's just a tip. Trollhammers are extremely powerful. They are definitely reduced in cost from what they were. They're worth bringing because they do so much damage and they debuff the leadership of whatever you hit, but they're very, very vulnerable. So they need a unit protecting them. So I was just curious as to how our slayers would do. This was one of the units we found, I think, in the last episode. A slayer with 2 chevrons is one of our essential units for this matchup. How did they do against the feral cold ones? Well, this is the biggest crush I've ever seen in all of my testing ever. They finished off the feral cold ones in an average of 17 seconds. It was ridiculous. You know, they're doing 125 DPS. Now, the feral cold ones did a lot of DPS. This is a little skewed because anything that has a big charge bonus, they do a lot more DPS up front, so it doesn't level out. But these slayers, they just crushed them. They pulled, even though they're twice as expensive, they pulled 121 gold out of that engagement at a rate of 452 gold per minute. Now, you might be saying, Two Devil, how can you do that? They're only 450 gold total. This is a rate as opposed to a total amount of gold. You can see in this one they finished them off in 14 seconds and pulled 791 gold per minute. So that's why I need these two things along with the win rate to really try and evaluate how effective a unit is. But these slayers with 2 chevrons absolutely demolish the feral cold ones. It is ridiculous. 17 seconds. I mean, honestly, I've never seen something go so fast as that in any of my testing. And I'm sure the Dragonback Slayers would be even faster, but that's pretty damn impressive. So I wanted to look at the Cold One Riders. I've seen lots of online matches where you'll see the Lizardman player put a group of Feral Cold Ones and Cold One Riders on each side. So they'll have 4 total units, 2 of each on each side. And so I wanted to see, how do these Bugman's Rangers stand up against Cold One Riders? Cold One Riders are significantly better, and they have better leadership. They have a lot more health. So let's take a look. Well, they lost every one, but they didn't do awful. They, the battle took forever. 255 seconds, 4 minutes. And I could see a Lizardmen player thinking, okay, I got my Cold Run Riders on Bugman's Rangers. I'm just going to toss them in and forget about them. They will, thinking that they're going to win that engagement. And eventually they will. It's going to take 4 minutes. So if it's going to take that long, you're going to be able to get your Slayers over, or someone else to come in and help. What that's saying is Bugman's Rangers are incredibly robust in the back line. They really can take care of themselves. And I mean, that's just fantastic too. And you look at the hit points they ended with, 388. That leadership they have is really good. Plus they are immune to psychology, which is really important for units that are out in the edge. I also wanted to take a look at, what if I give them those 3 chevrons? How can they do against Cold One Riders with those chevrons? Well, they did significantly better. The battle took longer, 282, but they won 4 out of 5. It's more like 50% from what I was seeing. You know, they one of these ones they won just barely, well, 2 of them, but it is much closer if the Lizardmen just sends them in and you have Rangers with 3 chevrons. They're going to win that sometimes. And if they take 2 shots or a shot or 2 before the Cold One Riders get in, they win it every time. It's a very reliable victory with the 3 chevrons. Bugman's Rangers against the Cold One Riders if they get 1 or 2 shots in before they arrive. But even with 3 chevrons, they're pretty even. 33 gold, 6.7 gold per minute. I would consider this a wash and consider these units equivalent in melee. And this is the one thing that's nice about Bugman's Rangers. Cycle charging is not going to be a big deal because they have charge defense against large. So Bugman's Rangers, wow, that is really good. You know, having a unit like that, a ranged unit that has stock, immune to psychology, regeneration, and they can hit like a truck with their arrows. We're going to go take a look at that later, but these Bugman's Rangers are worth every penny. And I would at least put them with +1 chevron. I think that is the correct number, the best number for their total value. But you can see they go from losing 184 gold to gaining 33. So that extra 100 gold more than pays for itself, and it's basically a 50 gold per minute differential to the positive. So very good. And so I wanted to look at our Slayers, our +2, our Slayers with 2 chevrons, our essential unit against the Cold One Riders, to see how they did. And it is another demolition. They finished off the Cold One Riders in an average of 50 seconds, less than a minute. That's why we're going to go look. These 2 I really think need to be put together in the back line. Because if they're sitting there for 280 seconds or 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, your Slayers are going to be able to get there, and they're going to get there with with bad intentions, we'll say. And they're going to be able to do something about it. And I could see the Rangers taking the charge so the Slayers don't have to. A lot of this damage the Slayer takes, you see the Slayers are doing 80 DPS here, damage per second, and the Cold One Riders doing 62. If the Slayers come in behind the Bugman's Rangers, the Cold One Riders are not going to do 62 DPS to your Slayers. It's going to be way down, something like 30, I would guess. And the Slayers will do the damage that they're going to do. So really huge. And they're pulling 311 gold per minute. Really fantastic. Your Slayers are just So good on the edges. The next one I looked at is, I actually wanted to see how Slayers were going to do against Horned Ones. Now, I realize Horned Ones are a very unlikely unit that you're going to see against the Lizardmen, because Horned Ones are really anti-large. They do have a good armor piercing, and they are a very good unit. So maybe someone might bring them. I was just curious to see how our Slayers would do up against Horned Ones, and they do fantastic. They kill them in 81 seconds. They win every time. Some of them are pretty close. They could lose that encounter, but they're pulling, they went from 250 to 500 gold, and they're pulling it at 376 gold per minute. So your Slayers with 2 chevrons, really protecting your edges and your back line, are going to be able to do a fantastic job, because we already saw how well they did against Krokgar. All right. So that's really the Cav engagement, and the unit that really stands out above any other is the Bugman's Rangers. So I wanted to see how the dwarf ranged units fared up against chameleon skinks. Now, you may or may not see chameleon skinks. Like, they're not going to do good against any dwarf ranged units, because dwarfs just have better armor, they have shields, they have better range. But the one thing a chameleon skink can do good against is a Slayer. And it's because the Slayers don't have any armor. Plus, chameleons can outrun them because they have 48 movement speed. Slayers, I think, are at 40. But they also poison things. And poison is really nasty if you allow them to just pick away. So if they get into position, they can pick away your Slayers pretty quick. They can poison them, bringing down their weapon damage and really hurt them. So what are the best units that are really good at demolishing the chameleon skinks fast? So I wanted to take a look at first the Rangers, and the chameleon skinks aren't cheap. I mean, they're 600, but obviously they have stock, they can get very close, but of course they lose every time to the Rangers. The Rangers won every one of them. The Rangers are doing 25 DPS as opposed to 10. They finish with 2,900 hit points, to be expected, but they pull 300 gold out of that and 168 gold per minute. So our regular Rangers are going to crush chameleons. So how do the Quarrelers do? I would expect, and expected going in, the Quarrelers would take less damage and do about the same, because Quarrelers have more armor, and that is precisely what we see. They do 25.5 DPS as opposed to 25.0, and they only take 9.5 as opposed to 10.4. They win every one. They pull 306 gold out of that. Even though they're more expensive, they pull even more gold at a rate of 175 gold per minute. The thing to note here is some of these results get a little bit funny, because as units die, the total unit DPS goes down. So your Rangers, you would expect to have exactly the same damage per second as the Quarreler, but it turns out maybe 1 or 2 Rangers got killed and stopped shooting, so their damage per second was down a little bit. So how do Quarrelers' great weapons fare in that? I mean, you expect them to take a lot more damage, of course, and they certainly do. The chameleons are doing 11.2 damage per second as opposed to 9.5, and you can see this is that effect. Their Quarrelers' DPS goes down to 24, which is a lot less than the Quarrelers with the shield, just because more of them died. And it takes a little longer to get the job done. It takes 112 seconds for them to finish off the chameleons, 105 for the Quarrelers. So the strongest damage per second here that is so far is 105. So really just over 1.5 minutes. I wanted to see how Thunderers would do, just out of curiosity, and they do really good. They finish them off in 79 seconds, and they finish with a lot of health. And the chameleons only do 8.1 damage per second, and the Thunderers do 31. What I really noticed is the Thunderers actually knock the chameleons down when they hit them. So the chameleons are constantly getting knocked down, getting back up, rearranging their formation, and that is why their DPS was so low. So your Thunderers actually do a really good job against chameleons. They pull out a total of 285 gold at 225 gold per minute. So that's actually quite good. They can get rid of them pretty quickly. The next unit was the Rangers with great weapons. So they do a ton of damage per shot, but wow. they don't have enough ammo to kill them. So the very first test, I was like, oh boy, well, how am I going to do this test? No point in really doing it. You don't want to counter skirmish with rangers with great weapons or Ulthar's raiders. I just got one test in. They do pretty good DPS, and they actually do pull a little gold while they're taking shots. But yeah, not the unit you want to be going up against another ranged unit ever. And same with Ulthar's raiders. I just did one test just for curiosity to see what the DPS levels were at and any gold differential. And until they ran out of ammo, they were doing pretty good. But they don't have a whole lot of ammo. You need your Ulthar's raiders and your rangers with great weapons for big dinosaurs, and you need to make sure you don't waste it because they don't have much. And I did use the Mark of Uthar on them for the first one just because. How about the Bugman's Rangers against the Chameleons? This was a big surprise. I knew they would win, but boy, they crushed them in 56 seconds. And the big thing is, the Chameleon Skinks got 0 kills on the Bugman's Rangers. So the Bugman's Rangers, they were doing 41.6 DPS. It was the highest by a lot. And I would say it's because they're more accurate and they have more weapon damage on their bolts. Pulled 252 gold out of that engagement, and even higher gold per minute than the Thunderers. And of course, the Thunderers took 79 seconds. They only took 56 seconds. So really, really good. I mean, I honestly can't see any reason to bring anything but Bugman's Rangers in the backline because they're so good. So I wanted to see if I add those 3 chevrons, how do they do? Can we pull more value out of it? And in fact, we can. We bring it down from 56 seconds to 50 seconds with that extra weapon damage for the bolts. We end up, instead of having 4,000 hit points, 4,200. We pull 257 gold instead of 252, so we do gain, and we pull it out at 310 gold per minute. So that is definitely worth it in this engagement specifically. Like I said, it's not worth it in the engagement against the Feral Cold ones. It definitely is worth it in the engagement against the Cold One Riders, but I think 1 chevron is actually the right number to have on the Bugman's Rangers, all things considered. So I also wanted to look at the Trollhammer torpedoes to see how they would do against the Chameleons, and unfortunately, the Chameleons just charged them. They didn't even shoot once. They just charged in and kicked the snot out of them. So I guess it's because Trollhammers are considered artillery. So maybe the AI just says go in, or they know that they're so weak that they could just beat them up. They don't need to do anything. So I also tried out the flamethrowers, and the same thing. Chameleons just charged in. The flamethrowers did do a lot of damage, but oddly enough, not as much as the Bugman's Rangers. The Bugman's Rangers are just unbelievable. And that's it for the testing. So I do have some more testing to do. I just wanted to kind of get this part out because I've been very interested to see how those Bugman's Rangers were going to do. So we're going to head back into in-game and just summarize there. All right. So I guess the bit of information that comes out of the analysis we're looking at there is really there isn't another unit you want defending your edges aside from your Bugman's Rangers and your Slayers. Like really, I could see on pretty much any build, you put 1 Bugman's Ranger and 1 Slayer on each edge, and that's your entire edge defense. Against the Lizardmen, because they don't have anything that can beat those 2 straight up. They just don't. So you're going to be able to do some work. They could bring in some Pterodon Riders as well, but if they land, they're just going to get absolutely obliterated by the Slayers, and if they don't land, your Bugman's Rangers will knock them out of the sky because they outrange them. So this is really the edge defense for the Dawi against the Lizardmen, and there is no doubt about it. There is nothing else I would put out there nothing that's even close to these two units at these chevron levels. Now, one thing I do want to note, again, if you look and I go from 0 chevrons to 1, you'll see I get leadership, I get melee defense, melee attack, and missile damage. So you go up, I go from 24 and 38 melee attack, melee defense, and 25 to 25 and 39 and 26, and then I get the leadership. And you also do get a little bit of vigor. So that's the first sweet spot. Now, if I go 2 more up, like 1 more doesn't do anything hardly. It just gives me some melee defense. But the second one gives me up to 27 missile damage, and it gives me 1 melee attack, 1 melee defense. Again, you can just see it. I go from 25 and 41 to 26 and 42 and 27. So that's why that 3 is another sweet spot. I think the next sweet spot is at 5. So we go up to 28 and actually maybe 6. Let me see. Yeah, it is. It's at actually 6 chevrons because I get 29 missile damage. You go with that extra one. So that, like, with 6 chevrons, they have, you know, I don't know if I'd ever put a Bugman's Ranger up to 6 chevrons, but they'll be able to handle themselves quite well. The problem is they don't have a lot of armor piercing. They only do 4 armor piercing. So when the edge engagement is done and they've taken care of the skirmishers, they're going to have to focus on the big dinos, and they're gonna do some damage over time. They're gonna pepper them, and they're going to be quite annoying. So I don't know if I would ever go more than 2 in that engagement, but really the nice part about it is this is in every matchup, this is your edge defense settled. There is nothing better that I can see for the units that you're going to put on your edges. And you do have some options with chevrons. You can go 1, 3, or 6, and you know those are the kind of the sweet spots. I don't know if I'd ever go with 6, but definitely 1 and 3 are very good. And then 2 on your slayers, and your backline or your edge defense is completely set. So the next episode we're going to look at what's in the pocket. We know we have the front line set, we have our essential units up there, and we have a lot of options with the Ironbreakers, Hammers, Longbeards, you know, your Warriors of Dragonfire Pass. You have a lot of options to your front line to go wide or to go a little more narrow and have more elite units. And you can even put in your Norgrimling's Ironbreakers in there, definitely, although I would stay away from the Peak Gate Guard. But Norgrimling's Ironbreakers are really good in this matchup on the front line and the back line. They're just excellent. I mean, they're just expensive, so you got to watch them. And the Ironbreakers are fantastic, too. I mean, the thing about the Ironbreakers, again, you always got to watch the chevrons. Say, 1 chevron, they go from 30 and 68 to 31 and 70. So that's a really, really high value chevron for that unit. But so we have our front line basically set, and we have options: go wide, go narrow, go with a lot of damage, high damage dealers, or go with a front line that's just going to hold and is going to muck up the big dinosaurs. Like, the big dinosaurs are going to have a hard time waddling through your Ironbreakers. The next thing I want to look at is really what's in the pocket, like what's in the middle of your formation. We know that whether you use a Rune Lord, a regular Lord, or Ungram, you're definitely going to want to put them embedded, locked formation with your Dragonback Slayers. But what else do you have? What kind of, do you want artillery? Do we want something more mobile? Do we want Trollhammer torpedoes? I've done some private testing already. Or do we want gyros in the back there? I've done some private testing already, so I got a pretty good idea of what looks good back there. But we're going to do the full set of tests, and you know, I guess, you know what I should do, just for fun, I'm going to run one quick battle, and we will show that fight with our Slayers with 2 chevrons versus the Feral Cold ones, just so you can all see how ridiculously fast and fun this is. And then we'll end the episode after that. I was really surprised at how fast they got the job done. It was like, I didn't even have my mouse over the pause button to take the time or anything like that. So, all right. So they're gonna meet around there, 59.45 about, but they just dumpstered and gone. 59.26. That is very satisfying. So, yeah, it's just an absolute crush. Yeah, those Slayers are pretty good. So, that'll do it for the episode. Hope you found it interesting, and it seems that the edge defense is set against the Lizardmen when we look at this analysis, and I hope you can use it in some of your online battles. I know there's a lot of opponents you're not going to get to fight Lizardmen a whole lot, but definitely hope that was useful, and hope you liked the Bugman's Rangers testing. I was just shocked at how good they are. Like, they are outstanding, and they're amongst a group of really outstanding ranged units. Like, there's no slouches in this entire lineup, for ranged units, and these Bugman's Rangers stand out in the Dwarf lineup, which stands out compared to everyone else's lineup. So they are fantastic. So we'll end it there. Hope you found it interesting, and I will see you soon.